Hello, family. Thanks for journeying here with me on another Sunday in the Scriptures as we celebrate this beautiful feast of the Holy Family. And today's reading comes from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 2, verse 41 through 52. And as it reads, each year, Jesus' parents went to Jerusalem for the feast of Passover. And he was 12 years old. They went up according to festival custom. After they had completed its days and they were returning, the boy Jesus remained behind in Jerusalem, but his parents did not know it. Thinking that he was in the caravan, they journeyed for a day and looked for him among their relatives and acquaintances. But not finding him, they returned to Jerusalem to look for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting in the midst of the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were astounded at his understanding and his answers. When his parents saw him, they were astonished. And his mother said to him, "Son, why have you done this to us? Your father and I have been looking for you with great anxiety." And he said to them, "Why were you looking for me? Did you not know that I must be in my father's house?" But they did not understand what he had said to them. He went down with them and came to Nazareth and was obedient to them. And his mother kept all these things in her heart. And Jesus advanced in wisdom and age and favor before God and man. Gospel of the Lord. So here we are celebrating the Feast of the Holy Family, and this takes place in the context of the great Jewish feast of Passover. We've talked about the Passover many times. It was one of 3 pilgrim feasts that Jews from all over that part of the world would pilgrimage to Jerusalem to celebrate this great feast, to remember God setting their ancestors free from slavery in Egypt and giving them the promised land in which they dwelt at the time, present-day Israel. And this would have been maybe equivalent to something like our feast of Christmas or Easter, something very big on our liturgical calendar. And there would have been up to 1 million Jews potentially that go to Jerusalem to celebrate this grace feast. So a lot of people there. And here our first line is, each year, Jesus' parents went to Jerusalem for the feast of Passover. Each year. This tells us that Joseph and Mary were faithful to the law, never making themselves above the law, despite raising God. If anybody could have made excuses or thought that they didn't have to follow God's law, it would have been, Mary, who gives birth, the virgin birth, to God himself. They easily could have tried to justify putting themselves above the law, but no, each year, the parents of Jesus, Joseph and Mary, go to Jerusalem, being obedient to the law. And we see this in other places as well, as Jesus is circumcised on the 8th day, and they offer the sacrifice according to the law of Moses. They are obedient to God and his law, even though they're raising the second person of the Trinity himself. And this would have been a difficult journey. This wasn't like, hey, let's, go vacation in Jerusalem. This would have been about a 90-mile journey from Nazareth up in the north to Jerusalem in the south over tough terrain and a hard journey by foot, which would have taken several days. But they always made the time and set apart this specific time to journey to Jerusalem to celebrate the great feast of Passover. And it just kind of makes me think in my own life, this was a hard journey. It would have been inconvenient on many levels. Joseph would have had to take time off of work and most likely work really hard before that and really hard after that to make up for the lost time. It would have been a few days journey down. They would have had to stay there for several days and then a few days journeys back. But they made the sacrifice to be obedient to God's law. And what sacrifice is the Lord calling us to make? To be more obedient to him and his law that he's given us. Here we also learn that Jesus was 12 years old. And this is really the only time in Scripture that we kind of have this kind of 12-year-old Jesus, and we have his birth, we have his, Mary receiving the Annunciation and the visitation and pregnant, and the birth of Jesus in the manger in Bethlehem, and then escaping to Egypt. And really, this is the only event that we know of before the baptism of Jesus when he's about 30 years old by John the Baptist in the Jordan River. And then, of course, the last 3 years of his earthly life in public ministry before going to the cross. So, Jesus, they're all in Jerusalem celebrating the great feast of Passover, and then they all leave. They're all going home. And they would have traveled in a large caravan, friends and family, and here it says acquaintances from Nazareth in the north. So if you're going to make this long, tough journey that could be dangerous, you're going to do it with a big group of people. Probably everybody from that region, friends, family, and everybody would have just traveled together in one big caravan down to Jerusalem to celebrate the feast. So I kind of imagine they journey for a day with hundreds of people. And at the end of the day, Joseph and Mary, it's probably dark and they're going to set up their camp for the night. And they're like, hey, where's Jesus? We haven't seen him in a little bit, and thinking he's with his friends and other families and relatives and stuff like that. They start looking around and they notice nobody's seen Jesus. He's not with anyone. And then, of course, panic sets in for Joseph and Mary. And maybe parents can relate to this. Maybe you've had an experience where you've lost a child at a theme park or a mall, or you thought, your child, 5, 8, 10 years old, whatever it might be, was with someone else and they weren't with them. And then that sense of panic that sets in. So this is what Joseph and Mary would have experienced. So then they set out to return to Jerusalem. So they just journeyed for a day. Then they realized Jesus isn't there. So they go all the way back, another day's journey back to Jerusalem. And just imagine their worry and how long that walk must have been for them, knowing that they have kind of lost God, their boy that they've cared for, that they love for the last 12 years. And then on the third day, they find him, and they find him in the temple. The temple was, of course, the place of sacrifice, but it was also a place of dialogue amongst theologians. So Jesus is now in the temple. And I love how it says that Jesus is in the temple and he's listening to them, the teachers. He's listening and asking them questions. I think we could take a cue from that, right? To listen, to ask questions, to humble ourselves and say, we don't know everything. And maybe we could learn from people if we would just listen and ask questions. And that's what we see Jesus doing here. And then his parents find him. Joseph and Mary find him, and Mary says, son, why have you done this to us? Your father and I have been looking for you with great anxiety. They were looking, they were worried, they were scared. And Jesus' response is, why were you looking for me? Sorry, let me flip the page. Why were you looking for me? Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house? Also, you can translate it as that I must be about my Father's affairs. And here we know that at 12 years old, Jesus is aware of his identity. He's starting to grow in who he is and what he has come to do and what his business is about. He's about doing his Father's will. But we also learn at the end of this reading that Jesus also had to advance. He advanced in wisdom and in age and favor before God and man. So Jesus was fully God, but yet he was fully human, and he had to be taught, and he had to grow physically and mentally and spiritually and emotionally, just like us. He participates in our life in everything except sin, even experiencing temptation and our struggles. Jesus cried when he found out his friend Lazarus died. He experienced the fullness of the human experience apart from sin. And after Jesus replied this, it says that Joseph and Mary didn't understand. They didn't understand what he said to them. Joseph and Mary had to rest in the mystery of the incarnation of God. They didn't quite grasp it. They certainly didn't have it easy. They had worries, they had fears, they might have even had doubts, just like us. They didn't know the whole of God's plan. And therefore, they had to walk by faith, just like us, one step at a time, because surely we don't know the full of God's plan. But obviously, through this reading, we learn that Joseph and Mary didn't either. And there was things that they did not understand and that required them to trust God and to walk in faith. So one of the things that I think we, and certainly myself, can take from this reading is, again, to imitate our Mother Mary and to keep all these things. It says that Mother Mary, when she didn't understand, it says his mother kept all these things in her heart. She pondered them in her heart. So let us take everything to prayer, to ponder everything and to take it to the Lord in prayer. Let us ask the Lord to give us the grace to trust him despite our lack of understanding. Please pray for me as I pray for you, and may God always bless and protect you.